In early December 1984, Bhopal functioned on a layered schedule that did not end when daylight did. By late evening on December 2nd, the central districts had already shifted into night mode. Storefront shutters down along the main roads, long-distance buses arriving and departing from the terminals, food stalls serving workers from nearby factories before they returned to cramped lanes and low-rise housing. Street lighting traced the primary routes. Many residential clusters at the city's edge remained dim, relying on scattered bulbs and interior lights that leaked through doorways. On the southeastern side, the pesticide plant sat embedded between the rail line and densely populated neighborhoods, its boundary marked by walls, gates, and the geometry of storage tanks and processing units. Inside, the night shift operated under reduced staffing, a standard pattern for this hour. Control room panels lit, gauges monitored, valves adjusted, maintenance tasks scheduled around lower production load. Steam, water, and power systems supplying the facility ran within expected ranges. In nearby settlements, residents settled onto narrow beds and floors, ceiling fans turning where electricity was available, kerosene lamps burning where it was not. The city's hospitals maintained their usual night rhythm. Emergency departments open but not overloaded. Wards staffed at reduced ratios. Ambulances idle in bays unless called. Rail traffic moved through the adjacent yard at intervals. Freight wagons shunted and parked according to routine schedules. Telecommunications carried their typical night volume. Trunk calls, occasional telex traffic. Local exchanges handling fewer connections than in the daytime. Air over the industrial quarter carried the mixed odors of fuel, sewage, and chemical production that had become a stable background for nearby neighborhoods. Indicator lights on the plant's structures punctuated the darkness in fixed patterns. Nothing in the behavior of the city's grid, power, water, transport, communications, or industrial operations suggested that these hours between late evening and after midnight would differ from any other working night. By late evening, the operating environment inside the plant began registering small deviations that did not immediately translate into visible change outside its perimeter. In the control room, several indicators associated with the storage section showed values drifting toward the upper edge of their normal ranges. Marginally rising temperatures in one of the MIC tanks, slight increases in internal pressure, and fluctuations in flow readings that suggested altered conditions within connected lines. At first, these shifts appeared consistent with routine variability, changes in ambient temperature, residual heat from earlier processing, or minor valve seepage. Operators made note of them, logged the numbers, and continued standard checks. In the storage yard, condensation formed more heavily than usual on the outer shell of Tank 610, creating thin, reflective layers under the low industrial lights. The surrounding soil felt warmer in a narrow band close to the tank's base, though not enough to prompt immediate concern. In neighborhoods downwind of the facility, residents noticed an odor in the air, sharp, unfamiliar, but intermittent. Some attributed it to routine plant discharge that occasionally drifted over the area when wind direction shifted. Others closed doors and windows, treating the smell as a transient nuisance. Inside the plant, workers conducting line maintenance recorded faint vibrations in a segment of piping connected to the storage unit, a pattern they had seen before during pressure equalization. A supervisor requested a routine water wash check but did not accelerate the timetable. The control room logged another minor pressure increase, this time accompanied by a brief spike in temperature that fell back within minutes. Monitoring systems across the section produced sporadic alarms, short-lived tones that self-cleared when readings stabilized. These alerts were common enough at night to be treated as noise rather than actionable events. Radio communication between teams reflected the same assumption. References to the tank noted, acknowledged, and left for follow-up once other tasks were complete. In the settlements adjacent to the plant, animals reacted first in ways residents only partially registered. Cattle tethered in courtyards shifted restlessly. Stray dogs moved away from the industrial boundary. Some families noted irritation in the eyes when stepping outdoors, but attributed it to smoke from cooking fires or dust carried by a light shift in wind. The city's medical facilities observed no unusual activity. Casual arrivals from routine causes, no clustering of symptoms, nothing to signal that conditions outside were changing. Inside the plant, however, instrument sensitivity captured data that humans on the ground could not yet interpret as connected. A tank thermometer recorded a temperature rise steeper than previous increments. Internal pressure built slightly faster. A flow meter downstream registered a short reversal in direction, a sign that internal reactions were altering expected dynamics. The control room sent a technician to verify readings manually. He noted heat radiating from the tank's surface as higher than typical for that hour and season, though still within nominal tolerance. He reported the finding through the standard channel, where it joined other logs without triggering system-wide escalation. Overhead, the sky above Bhopal remained stable. Low haze, scattered clouds, faint light pollution from the central districts. No large-scale atmospheric events masked or magnified the conditions forming at ground level. The air column near the plant's southeastern quadrant carried a faint density shift, enough to hold odors closer to the surface, but not enough to appear visually differentiated. Across the city, systems continued their usual night cycle behavior. Power distribution showed no abnormalities. Water pressure held steady across municipal zones. Traffic on main arteries declined to near minimum levels. Communication networks experienced the typical late-night quiet. Within this stability, the first signs of divergence existed only in measurements. Numbers slightly outside typical patterns, alarms briefly activating, odors drifting unevenly through narrow streets. No single observation yet indicated system-level risk. But taken together, they marked the early formation of conditions that would soon exceed the plant's operational parameters and the city's capacity to absorb what those parameters contained. Through the hours approaching midnight, the city maintained its routine rhythm despite the subtle signals emerging from the industrial quarter. Traffic along the main arterial roads thinned to isolated vehicles. Late shift workers returning home, auto rickshaws completing final trips, freight movements continuing along the rail corridor. Streetlights on major intersections functioned normally, casting steady cones of illumination over largely empty lanes. Shops in the central districts had closed, leaving quiet commercial strips and scattered pedestrians moving without urgency. In residential sectors near the plant, families prepared for sleep or settled into nighttime tasks. The intermittent odor noted earlier lingered in some alleys but dissipated in others, prompting windows to be closed or fabrics to be hung over vents. Routine actions in neighborhoods accustomed to occasional industrial discharge. Most residents treated these conditions as background irregularities rather than warnings. Inside the plant, operations continued at standard night staffing levels. The control room acknowledged gradual increases in Tank 610's readings, but interpreted them through the template of past fluctuations that resolved without incident. Pressure trends were discussed briefly, then set aside pending further confirmation. Maintenance crews proceeded with scheduled tasks, including line flushing and valve checks without altering pace. Supervisors authorized no additional manpower or system isolation. Communications across teams reflected low concern. Brief radio exchanges, acknowledgement tones, and procedural language that framed the anomalies as manageable variations. In the adjacent neighborhoods, the odor reappeared in short bursts, carried by shifting surface winds. Residents waking to it reported discomfort in their eyes or throats, but remained indoors, assuming the smell would pass as it often did when processing units vented small quantities of gas. The absence of visible smoke, unusual light, or audible alarms reinforced the perception that conditions were non-critical. Street vendors extinguished fires, stacked utensils, and closed stalls without haste. Tea shops at key junctions continued serving the last customers of the night. Medical infrastructure registered no significant deviation from normal night patterns. The emergency departments of local hospitals saw routine cases, minor injuries, fevers, respiratory complaints unrelated to air quality. No clustering of symptoms suggested a developing problem. Ambulances remained parked outside, engines off, crews resting between calls. Staff rotation proceeded by schedule. Within the plant perimeter, manual checks repeated earlier observations: elevated tank temperature, discernible warmth near the base, and occasional condensation shifts along the shell. Yet these findings were interpreted within the framework of expected variability. Operators continued adjusting valves incrementally to regulate flow, assuming internal conditions would stabilize. Instrumentation alarms that triggered briefly were cleared as transient. Documentation procedures remained unchanged. Across Bhopal, systems held steady. Power distribution across residential and industrial sectors delivered consistent voltage. Water supply networks operated without pressure drop. Gas lines to homes and small restaurants maintained normal flow. Telecommunication exchanges processed calls without congestion. Rail activity along the plant boundary continued uninterrupted, freight wagons being repositioned, couplings clattering as locomotives eased carriages into alignment. A light mist developed near the southeastern quadrant as the night cooled, visually softening the plant's silhouette, but offering no indication of internal changes. The rooftops and narrow streets of adjacent neighborhoods appeared undisturbed. Dim light through doorways, muffled voices, the hum of ceiling fans in sectors with uninterrupted electricity. From the perspective of the city's systems, the night showed no organized sign of deviation. The early warnings embedded in instrument readings and intermittent odors had not translated into coordinated response or heightened alert. Protocols remained at standard levels. Movement continued according to personal schedules, not communal precaution. The anomalies remained compartmentalized, noticed, acknowledged, and then absorbed into the city's baseline expectation that irregularities in the industrial zone seldom escalated beyond nuisance. The spatial grid held its shape, and the night advanced without visible disruption, even as the internal dynamics of a single tank continued shifting toward conditions that no longer aligned with normal operational boundaries. Shortly after midnight, the operational balance inside the plant shifted in a way that routine protocols could no longer absorb. In the control room, Tank 610's readings moved past familiar margins. Temperature rose in a sustained arc rather than in intermittent steps, and internal pressure accelerated beyond the pace expected from ambient influences or residual heat. Instrument alarms that had previously cleared on their own now held steady, prompting operators to acknowledge the alerts, but still without full system escalation. A request for additional verification was made, sending a technician once more into the storage yard. There, the physical conditions no longer matched nominal expectations. Heat radiated more perceptibly from the tank's surface. The soundscape changed. Faint internal agitation, inconsistent with normal fluid behavior, carried through the steel shell. These observations were reported, but the response remained within procedural boundaries. Recheck valves, review logs, continue monitoring. In the surrounding neighborhoods, the odor that had appeared earlier intensified into a sharper, more persistent layer. Residents stepped outdoors to investigate and returned quickly, wiping irritated eyes or pulling fabric over their mouths. Some attributed the smell to a routine plant purge. Others attempted to move to higher floors or toward better ventilated areas. Still, no coordinated pattern formed. Streets remained quiet. Lights stayed on in scattered homes, but movement was limited. Animals in courtyards grew restless, pulling against ropes or pacing along walls. Inside the plant's internal network, flow meters connected to the tank registered behavior inconsistent with controlled storage. Reversal signatures returned, stronger this time and sustained. Pressure relief points that should have stabilized the system showed no meaningful effect. The control room initiated partial isolation of the affected line, but by this point, the internal reaction had reached a scale where incremental adjustments no longer altered the trajectory. Heat increased at a rate beyond the capacity of standard cooling and washing procedures. A faint mist formed above the tank's access points, initially thin, scattered, indistinct under the low industrial lights. Seen from a distance, it blended with normal nighttime humidity. Up close, it held density and motion, particles drifting downward before dispersing laterally near ground level. The technician observing it reported this change immediately. Only then did supervisory staff initiate a broader status review, checking inventories, storage conditions, and maintenance logs for the night. Beyond the plant's boundary, the odor expanded into a wider band. People waking with irritation in their eyes found the air inside their homes insufficiently clear. Some attempted to leave their houses, stepping into narrow lanes where the smell was stronger. Others stayed indoors, closing doors and windows, unaware that the concentration outside was rising. The city's hospitals had not yet registered an influx, but the first calls had begun. Complaints of breathlessness, eye burning, coughing. Staff noted these calls as isolated occurrences. Within the plant, attempts to introduce water into the affected system failed to counteract the reaction already underway. The rate of temperature rise indicated runaway behavior. Pressure gauges edged toward design limits. The internal dynamics of the tank converted from manageable deviation to accelerating instability. The control room, recognizing that readings no longer responded to intervention, initiated internal emergency notifications. Sirens inside the facility activated, not loud enough to reach the neighborhoods but audible to workers in nearby sections. Some personnel began moving toward assembly points. Others attempted to complete valve operations before evacuation. At ground level, the mist above the tank thickened into a visible plume, low to the surface and moving with the night breeze toward residential sectors. It spread horizontally rather than rising, following the geometry of streets, alleys, and open courtyards. Street dogs moved away from the advancing layer, some staggering, others retreating into sheltered areas. Residents stepping outside encountered air that provoked immediate coughing and tearing, prompting them to retreat indoors, though the concentration inside continued to rise as the plume advanced. The situation had crossed from anomaly to event. The internal reaction inside Tank 610 no longer offered a path back to stability through routine intervention. The containment system had shifted beyond operational control. The plume moving outward from the plant had formed a coherent front, carried by surface winds into densely populated areas. Movement in the city shifted from routine to response, not coordinated, not informed by official channels, but driven by the physical environment altering faster than information could travel. The night remained dark and structurally unchanged, yet the conditions within it had entered a phase that no longer allowed reversal. In the minutes after the plume formed a stable front, The release transitioned from contained anomaly to active environmental force. At the plant, pressure inside tank 610 exceeded structural tolerance. A rapid venting sequence began, sending a dense stream of MIC vapor into the air. The gas exited with enough force to generate a low, continuous resonance, more vibration than sound, registering through the metallic structures in the ground beneath them. The plume contracted upward briefly, then, instead of rising, folded downward toward the surface, its density preventing vertical lift. Under the prevailing light wind, it advanced laterally across the plant boundary. The gas interacted immediately with ambient humidity, forming a thickening cloud that expanded as it moved. Streetlights along the perimeter cast diffuse halos into the opaque mass, distorting depth perception and reducing visibility to a few meters. Structures near the boundary lost definition behind the advancing layer. Vegetation wilted almost instantly as the plume made contact, leaves curling and darkening in seconds. Metal surfaces accumulated condensation that etched patterns where droplets combined with vapor. As the plume reached residential lanes, its physical effects became pronounced. The gas hugged the ground, flowing into depressions, courtyards, and low-lying rooms. Doors left partially open allowed the cloud to enter homes without resistance. Within seconds, interior visibility dropped as the white-gray mass filled enclosed spaces. Residents attempting to move outdoors encountered higher concentrations at street level. Those remaining inside found the gas seeping through window gaps and vents. Movement became erratic. Individuals retreating from one direction met denser air in another. Breathing zones shifted downward as the gas displaced normal air. The surface layer thickened until it formed a continuous blanket along the ground. Street dogs collapsed in drainage channels. Livestock tethered near homes fell onto their sides as the vapor advanced. Bicycle frames left against walls accumulated a thin residue as droplets settled. The cloud expanded along road networks, turning intersections into pools of opaque air where headlights produced only short cones of illumination. In the industrial corridor, the force of release continued. The tank's venting produced intermittent pulses, brief surges that sent new waves of vapor into the main plume. Each surge thickened the leading edge, adding density that accelerated its surface-level spread. The low-frequency vibration persisted, carried through piping and support structures. Nearby metal sheds experienced corrosion-like patterns emerging within minutes as the gas adhered to surfaces. Hospitals located farther from the plant experienced rapid internal transition. Emergency departments filled with individuals arriving on foot, in rickshaws, or carried by others. Doors remained open as people entered, allowing the gas to drift inside in faint traces. Corridors became congested as staff attempted to triage without clear information on the source or duration of exposure. Equipment alarms tripped in rooms where air intake systems drew in contaminated air. Ventilation ducts carried the odor deeper into buildings. Across the southeastern sectors, sound changed. The usual night mix of distant traffic and voices disappeared, replaced by muffled coughing, running footsteps, and the shifting of objects in homes and courtyards. The gas dampened acoustics, producing an uneven silence across blocks where movement slowed. Vehicle engines sputtered as drivers attempted to navigate through dense air. Visibility through windshields dropped to near zero in affected zones. Some vehicles stalled, their occupants exiting only to encounter higher concentrations. Street-level illumination diminished as the plume thickened. Light from homes and shops refracted through the opacity, reducing contrast and making orientation difficult. Shadows disappeared. Landmarks lost form. The spatial grid of lanes and alleys blurred into a continuous field of low visibility. The gas advanced toward the central districts, its leading edge dispersing slightly but remaining potent near the ground. Inside the plant, the venting continued until internal pressure began to equalize. By then, the plume had already expanded into multiple neighborhoods, following contours of streets and terrain. The event had established its physical footprint, wide, shifting, and sustained across the southeastern quadrant. The environment transitioned fully into the impact phase, air displaced, visibility altered, movement constrained, and systems operating within a landscape no longer consistent with their design assumptions. As the night advanced toward early morning, the plume began to thin at higher elevations but remained dense at ground level across wide sections of the city. Surface winds weakened, slowing the cloud's movement and allowing pockets of concentrated gas to persist in low-lying areas. Visibility improved slightly in some corridors as the upper layer dispersed, but the ground layer held its opacity, moving in slow, uneven drifts along streets and settling into depressions. Light from homes and street lamps refracted through the residual vapor, casting diffuse glows that marked occupied structures, but did little to illuminate the surrounding air. The odor remained strong enough that residents attempting to move outdoors found navigation difficult, eyes watering, breathing irregular, and orientation challenged by the cloud's lingering density. Hospitals across Bhopal exceeded their operational limits within the same hour. Triage lines extended into parking areas. Corridors filled beyond capacity as residents arrived from the affected sectors, many transported by neighbors or rickshaw drivers who moved repeatedly through contaminated zones. Ventilation systems struggled to maintain interior air quality. In some departments, intake ducts continued to draw in diluted gas, prompting staff to open windows or move patients into interior rooms. Power remained available in most medical facilities, but equipment load spiked, and some units experienced intermittent failures. Records were kept manually when systems slowed under increased usage. Communication lines ringing into hospitals jammed as families attempted to reach staff for guidance or locate relatives. Emergency services faced immediate obstacles. Fire and rescue units mobilized from multiple districts but encountered reduced visibility, abandoned vehicles, and residents moving unpredictably through the streets. Sirens were audible only at close range due to the sound dampening effect of the residual gas. Crews moved on foot into the densest zones where vehicle passage was impossible. Coordination across agencies degraded as radio communication faltered in areas where equipment drew contaminated air into housings, or where line-of-sight repeaters underperformed. Dispatchers logged calls continuously, but lacked precise mapping of affected neighborhoods due to shifting plume boundaries and the absence of visual cues on the ground. The plant itself remained partially illuminated by industrial lighting, but interior sections showed limited activity. Workers had evacuated to assembly points, leaving equipment running in compromised conditions. Cooling and water wash systems had not contained the earlier reaction, and portions of the facility remained coated with residue that reacted with ambient moisture. The surrounding walls marked the boundary only in form. The operational impact extended far beyond. Utility crews arrived to inspect adjacent lines, but delayed entering the plant's core until gas concentration readings stabilized. Across residential sectors closest to the release, streets remained largely still. Movement continued only in short, necessary bursts as residents sought clearer air or attempted to reach relatives. Many stayed indoors, sealing rooms with fabric and water-soaked cloths, though the permeation of gas through small openings kept interior concentrations elevated. In some clusters, groups gathered in shared courtyards, choosing open-air spaces over enclosed rooms in hopes of dispersal. By dawn, the upper layers of the plume dissipated further, revealing silhouettes of structures and street corridors but leaving a persistent ground-level haze in the southeastern quadrant. Morning light exposed the physical markers of the event: residue on outdoor surfaces, fallen animals in courtyards and alleys, bicycles and carts left mid-route where visibility had become too low to continue. Public buses scheduled to depart before sunrise remained parked at depots. Operators awaited confirmation of routes that passed near industrial sectors. Rail operations slowed but did not cease. Locomotives idled outside the affected zone until visibility improved. Communication systems operated unevenly. Some exchanges handled traffic normally, while others showed extended delays as call volumes surged. Police stations took reports from residents seeking missing family members but lacked consolidated information. Lists were compiled by hand, often duplicated across facilities without cross-reference. The absence of real-time coordination produced fragmented data, with different agencies forming separate accounts of the same neighborhoods. Medical capacity remained critical throughout the morning. Hospitals unable to process further arrivals redirected residents to other facilities or established temporary treatment areas in courtyards and corridors. Ventilation inside buildings was adjusted repeatedly to reduce infiltration. Staff from unaffected sectors arrived on foot or by improvised transport, filling emergency roles as existing teams reached exhaustion. Utility networks registered multiple stresses but maintained partial function. Power distribution remained stable across most districts, though localized outages occurred where gas infiltrated substations or corroded exposed components. Water systems operated at reduced pressure in areas where usage had increased overnight. Some residents attempted to wash away residue with buckets drawn from wells or stored containers, creating localized pooling in courtyards and streets. By the end of the same day, the plume had dispersed enough that ground-level concentrations declined across the central and northern districts. In the southeastern sectors, however, the gas lingered in shallow basins and sheltered spaces, requiring continued avoidance. Emergency crews marked several areas as restricted until readings fell further. The broader city remained operational. Markets opened, traffic resumed, and power stayed available in most zones. But the southeastern quadrant did not regain normal function. Its streets held pockets of gas, its residents remained dislocated or sheltering in place, and its systems, medical, transport, communication, community, operated under strain. The day concluded not with resolution but with partial visibility across districts that had begun the previous night in ordinary conditions. The built environment stood intact, but the air that moved through it no longer matched the assumptions of the systems designed to sustain the city. The release had ended, its effects had not.